Yin Ruhua's heart is higher than the sky, and her destiny is thinner than paper. She was originally just a concubine of the Marquis' mansion, but relying on her own jade bones and ice skin, her appearance is unparalleled, and she openly and secretly wants to be higher and lower than her eldest sister. One day she had a dream, in which her eldest sister was the chosen daughter of heaven, and she was just a stumbling block at her feet. The best control group for the elegant and luxurious eldest sister. One is as lowly as an ant, and the other is priceless. Awakening Yin Ruhua. Damn, it's lowly ant, my aunt won't accompany me anymore. Hurry up and pack up your bags, she has to go and congratulate the remaining crown prince. Compared to those miscellaneous fish, this is the real dragon, and no one wants to snatch this thigh. Sick crown prince. When you die of illness, you can remarry. Yin Ruhua's face turned pale and shaky. The next day, the secret guard reported that Madame has been cutting her wrist and letting blood as a medicinal guide for the past month. Before the words fell, Yin Ruhua fell limp, and the crown prince forcefully supported her sick body. With this help, she was lifted to the most prestigious position among women in the world. 1v1, Double Cleanliness. Minesweeper. Female leads Mind Machine Green Tea Attribute. Keywords of the novel. No more installation. After hugging the crown prince's thigh, I really smelled good. No pop-ups, no more installation. After hugging the crown prince's thigh, I really smelled good. Download the complete text. No more installation. After hugging the crown prince's thigh, I really smelled good. Read the latest chapter. Chapter 1. Raised by the Little Mother. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Raised by the Little Mother. Miss, hurry up and dress up. The imperial decree has arrived in the palace, and now the master and his wife are all going to receive it. The maid curled the pot and hurriedly ran in. Yin Ruhua grabbed the curling pot and said, "What are you saying? There is a decree coming down from the palace." "Yes, miss, please tidy up quickly and go take the order too." Yin Ruhua is like being struck by lightning. Dreams are real, and today there really is a decree coming down. Just last night, she had an incredible dream. That dream went through her entire tragic life, and she was like an outsider, watching with her own eyes how she ran wildly on the path of death without turning back. In her dream, she was ultimately killed by a glass of poisoned wine, and after her death, she was thrown into the wilderness. Her body was eaten by wild dogs, and her ferocious white bones looked extremely desolate in the cold wind, as if telling the story of the ending and fate of a failure. Yin Ruhua hasn't regained her senses all morning, but the news brought by curling the kettle right now makes her thunderous. "I am still seriously ill now, so I won't go take the imperial edict." "Curl the kettle, go listen to what the edict says, and come back immediately to report it," she said with a pale face. Curling remembered that her young lady was now seriously ill, so she had to perform the entire set of plays. "It's my fault, I'll go now." Curling came and went in a hurry, while Yin Ruhua sat down and waited for the imperial decree. Not long after, the curling pot returned with a shocked expression and reported, "Miss, the palace has issued a decree to select a young lady from the Yin Marquis' mansion to congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince." Yin Ruhua's pupils suddenly shrank, and the trembling hands in her sleeves exposed the shock and waves in her heart. There was no sign of this marriage decree being issued in the palace, and the sudden decree caught the entire Yin Marquis' mansion off guard. Prince Situji was critically ill last night, and the imperial physician administered 3 sets of tiger and wolf medicine to save his breath. In urgent need of a noble daughter to celebrate, this marriage was fortunate enough to fall on the Yin Marquis' mansion. It should have been a joyful marriage for the whole family, but who in the capital city doesn't know that His Highness the Crown Prince is weak? Even though he is the heartfelt son held in the palm of the Emperor's hand today, and even though he still occupies the position of Crown Prince, this Crown Prince is simply a lingering fire in the wind, with the possibility of swallowing at any time. What is the difference between marrying such a person and being a widow in the past? Even worse, it is not impossible to be buried together. None of the 3 young ladies in the Yin Marquis mansion, including her, are willing to marry. Curling immediately said, "Miss, please lie down quickly. You are now a seriously ill body, and this marriage will definitely not fall on you." Yin Ruhua's delicate face, as delicate as a peach blossom, had a touch of deathly white on it, and there was no more luck in her heart. Her aunt fell into a trap set by her stepmother to help her inquire about the whereabouts of the prince. She took full responsibility for the incident and completely took her away. How could she watch her aunt being sent to the estate? So she went to the main courtyard to beg her father, and after kneeling under the scorching sun for less than 2 cups of tea, she collapsed. Her father and aunt really love each other, so for the sake of her filial piety, he punished her aunt with half a month's money and banned her for 3 months as a warning. The body of a serious illness in the mouth of the curling pot is naturally the result of kneeling under the scorching sun and the 2 cups of tea that have been knelt out, but because of this, she really avoided this joyful task. Because she is not the only young lady in the mansion who has not yet left the palace. Above her is Yin Ruhua, the second eldest daughter of her legitimate mother, and above her is Yin Ruhua, the honest and amiable illegitimate eldest daughter. The aunt of Yin Ruhua, the eldest daughter of the commoner, was the dowry maid of her legitimate mother. She was later promoted with open face and was not more powerful than her aunt. She fought her own way in this backyard with bare hands. So it can be imagined who the marriage ultimately ended up with. Yin Ruhua married into the crown prince's mansion and died of depression within a year. Now the crown prince not only breathes his last breath quickly, but also subdues his wife. It's just that nobody expected that this sickly crown prince is truly the true dragon, although what was to be said next may not be reserved. Thinking of her tragic fate in the dream, Yin Ruhua really wished she could immediately pack her bags and go to congratulate the crown prince who was still hanging in one breath. At this moment, Zhou's mother came by her aunt's side. Yin Ruhua knows what Zhou's mother is doing here. Sure enough, Zhou's mother said, "Miss San, Auntie asked the old slave to pass on a message that you should soak in ice water all night tonight and solidify this seriously ill body." Yin Ruhua chuckled lightly. This was her aunt's ability. The person was banned and locked up, but it couldn't stop her from reaching the sky. She knew that just last night, her father had secretly visited her aunt and stayed overnight until it was almost dawn before leaving. Madame and others must know that they must be so angry that they can't help but curse her aunt for being a fox seducer and a fox spirit. "Miss San." Zhou's mother didn't know, so she looked at her. "I know now. Go back and tell my aunt to rest well. She doesn't have to worry too much about my affairs." Zhou's mother also knew Miss San's abilities. After she bowed, she came back to report to Aunt Hui, who had been confined to her feet. Aunt Yi is the biological mother of Yin Ruhua. Being able to give birth to a daughter like Yin Ruhua, and having been favored by the Marquis of Yin for over a decade, Aunt Ani's appearance is naturally impressive. Especially the charm on her body, just like a ripe peach, emitting a tempting fragrance. Every time I see her like this, my wife Zhang always finds it particularly eye-catching. But Lord Yin was satisfied and liked it, so her great favor was unshakable. For example, she was only punished yesterday, but Lord Yin quietly came to comfort her. It's said to be quiet, but the backyard is so big, and the other rooms must also know that it must have knocked over Chen Yan's jealousy. Aunt Hui lay on the bed of the noble consort like a fox spirit, satisfied and said, "Hua heir, just take note of it. This time we have also benefited from misfortune." Although she fell into a trap and was designed by her wife, it was only natural for her daughter to fall ill because of this. The matter of happiness is imminent, and a sick daughter cannot marry. Zhou's mother said, "Is it a bit harmful to have Miss San soak in ice water? Marquis is the most beloved miss, and there are also 2 big ones on top. Why can't it be Miss San's turn? How could one be careless about such a big matter?" Aunt Hui didn't even want to say, "Although I have to suffer a bit, it's always better to get over it and be happy." A woman who can conquer the sky in the Marquis' mansion is not the one who cannot bear the hardships. Not to mention soaking in ice water for a whole night. If she can avoid this relative, even if she wants to soak for 2 nights, she will have to make her daughter grit her teeth and persist. Otherwise, just in case, marrying into this lifetime will be over. My Hua is now in her prime, the most beautiful age in a woman's life. Even if there is 1 in 10,000 chance, I cannot afford to gamble. Zhou's mother still understood her and said with a smile, I'm afraid the other 2 sides will start quarreling. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Lethal Talisman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 3. The Fate of Phoenix and Phoenix. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The Fate of Phoenix and Phoenix. It's just a burst of joy, what else do you look at? Yin Ruhua looked at her, sister, you've always been the one who loves us the most as sisters. You can't push your sister out to block the knife for you at this time. San Mei. I'm sick, big sister. Yin Ruhua looked at her gently. I've been sick since yesterday, but big sister, you're not sick, and you're the eldest daughter. If you don't go to congratulate the crown prince and instead fall on your younger sisters, then if you go out and make a scene, the appearance of the Marquis' mansion will be fine. If it reaches the ears of the Holy Emperor and makes the palace suspect the loyalty of the Marquis' mansion, then. Mrs. Yin's heart trembled when she heard these threatening words. She despised the sight of this illegitimate woman, but she could not ignore Yin Ruhua's life and death, but she could not ignore the Yin Marquis' mansion. Once the royal family becomes dissatisfied with the Yin Marquis' mansion, the consequences are not something that the Marquis' mansion can bear. Zhang saw Aunt Li's careless and trembling appearance, and Yin Ruxing was also trembling like a sieve. The fighting power of these mother and daughter was extremely despised by Zhang. Why does Miss San need to talk about the royal suspicion of the Yin Marquis' mansion? Zhang could only personally take action and look at Yin Ruhua, saying, there are countless nobles in the capital. If you drop a tile finger, you may even hit the heavenly nobles. But how could this marriage fall on our Yin Marquis' mansion? Miss San really doesn't know. Is there any other reason here? Asked Mrs. Yin, who was also wondering. Although the Marquis' mansion of Yin is one of the top aristocratic families in the capital, it used to be very low-key and not so outstanding that it was directly favored by the emperor. This suddenly issued a decree, placing the burden of celebrating the crown prince on the Marquis' mansion of Yin, which is truly unimaginable. My mother is now indifferent, so I still don't know about Aunt Ani secretly spying on the whereabouts of the prince. With just one sentence from Zhang, Mrs. Yin's face suddenly changed. What? Aunt Hui, how dare this slut act so recklessly? She only heard about Yin Ruhua pretending to be sick today, and knew it was kneeling in the main courtyard in the past, but she didn't know that there was such a thing happening inside. Aunt Ani's feet have already been banned. Otherwise, when she heard that Miss San was invited by her mother, she might feel that her mother had harmed her daughter and wanted to come and protect her, said Zhang. Having committed such a catastrophic disaster, is this slut just grounded? Mrs. Yin was furious and sprayed at Zhang, is that how you are in charge of the family? With such a slut, are you still keeping her to cause trouble for the Marquis' mansion? Do you want the Marquis' mansion to be full of blame for this slut? Zhang immediately stood up and knelt down. It's because my daughter.in.law is incompetent. Please calm down my mother's anger. Yin Ruhua quickly said, Grandmother Mingjian. Aunt Ani has caused such a big disaster. Originally, the mother was going to send people to the manor, but the third younger sister went to the main courtyard and knelt down. Dad, for the sake of her filial piety, only forbade Aunt Ani. Zhang remained silent. This time she finally caught Aunt Ani's grip, naturally wanting to press her to death at once, so that she could never turn over again. But I can't resist the Marquis' heart turning to the horizon. Such a big matter can be suppressed. Last night, I even went to comfort that slut, it's really annoying. Seeing that Zhang and Yin Ruhua had such strong fighting abilities, Li and Yin Ruxing's mother and daughter reignited hope. But Yin Ruhua just listened expressionlessly to her legitimate mother and sister's lawsuit, not only without any surprise, but also more firmly convinced that her dream was true. These scenes all appeared in my dream last night. Extremely clear. This fox seductive slut. Upon hearing the insider information caused by Aunt Annie to the Marquis' mansion, Mrs. Yin was extremely angry and cursed Aunt Annie regardless of her status and demeanor. "Mother, don't get angry and break down." Zhang was helped up by her daughter and didn't sincerely comfort her, then turned the topic back. "And now, the most important thing is to solve the matter of Chongxi, which can't be delayed. We will get married in 3 days, and the candidate still needs to be determined first. If you can't deal with Aunt Annie, then just deal with this little fox seductive son, which is equivalent to dealing with Aunt Annie." Mrs. Yin glared at Yin Ruhua and said, "This is what you two, mother and daughter, have caused. What else do you have to say? I tell you, you have to get married for this marriage, you have to get married. If you don't get married, you have no choice." Yin Ruhua pinched herself, tears swirling in her eyes, looking very weak. However, her words were extremely harsh. "Grandma, be prepared to carry my body over," she said. Li, Yin Ruxing, and Yin Ruhua all changed their faces. However, Zhang remained motionless and had enough firewood. Next, all she needed was to watch a play. And this illegitimate woman is simply looking for a dead end. The old lady hates being threatened the most. As expected, the threatened old lady Yin was furious and stared at Yin Ruhua as if she had been poisoned. "How dare you threaten me? Have you forgotten that you still have an aunt in the Marquis' mansion? And those people from your mother's family who rely on you two for a living? You can die if you want, but if you die, they still want to live. Especially Aunt Annie, that lowly maid caused a great disaster for the Marquis' mansion. I immediately dealt with her, and she deserved it. Your father can protect her for a while, can he still protect her for a lifetime? This is a threat of being naked and naked." But Yin Ruhua was not afraid of the old lady's coercion at all, because she knew her father would protect the mother and daughter. "Auntie is the flesh of my father's heart, how could it harm the two of them? There is also the Fan family of the maternal clan outside, and her maternal grandmother and uncle's family are all fine. Because her aunt's over a decade of business in the mansion was not in vain, and she would still be afraid of this old lady. In the dream, she did indeed reject the marriage without being threatened, and Yin Ruxing was pushed out to replace her, but now the heat is almost here." Yin Ruhua's tears immediately fell down, and she knelt down weakly. "Grandmother, please let go of my aunt, my maternal grandmother and uncles. My aunt didn't mean to do it, everything she did was for me." She looked as if she had been pinched and her weak points were being grasped, causing Yin Ruhua to have a hint of joy between her eyebrows and eyes, with a triumphant expression on her face. And Zhang frowned slightly. Did this illegitimate woman succumb so easily? It's a bit unreal. Mrs. Yin snorted coldly. She couldn't clean up this little commoner anymore and continued, "Over the years, Aunt Annie has been sucking blood from the Marquis' mansion to help the Fan family. How much? If you don't get married, you'll have to return everything to me. And Aunt Annie has committed such a big disaster, so I'll reward her with a poisoned wine and keep her whole body. It's a cheap deal for her. No, don't hurt my aunt." Yin Ruhua cried like rain, weak and helpless. "I'm getting married, can't I get married yet?" The curling pot next to him had a big change in expression and was extremely anxious. When he wanted to say something, he was secretly pinched by Yin Ruhua. Yin Ruhua doesn't want to be harmed. Sure enough, at this moment, Lord Yin stepped in and had already stood at the door for a while. "Dad." Yin Ruhua saw her father as if she had seen a life-saving straw, and all kinds of grievances surged up. Lord Yin asked the curling pitcher to support her before bowing to the old lady. "I've seen my mother. Why did Marquis come?" Zhang shouted to herself when she saw him, but she could only bring her daughter to pay him respects and ask. Lord Yin snorted coldly, "If I don't come, how will you force Hua heir?" Zhang immediately looked at the old lady with a look of grievance on her face. Mrs. Yin angrily said, "What are you talking about? What is forcing her? Don't you know who caused this marriage in the Marquis' mansion?" "Yeah, who caused it?" Marquis Yin coldly swept towards Zhang, who went to Tianlong Temple to tell the fortune of Ruyu. "Do you think that's the territory of the third prince? Intelligence is actually mistaken by intelligence." Zhang and Yin Ruhua's faces changed. "Fortune-telling, what kind of fortune is it?" Mrs. Yin hesitated. Yin Ruhua lowered her head and remained silent. She knew what fate it was. Yin Ruhua, the eldest sister's birth date and 8 characters, were presided over by the Tianlong Temple, which belonged to the royal family. She calculated the fate of the phoenix and phoenix, which shocked the heavens. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Bitch in Bitch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Bitch in Bitch. Before this incident, Yin Ruhua had already been counted by someone else and deliberately went to Tianlong Temple to calculate again. She wanted to reveal it to the now thriving third prince, so that she could welcome her through the house. But he didn't know that Tianlong Temple was the territory of the emperor, and it directly spread to the emperor's ears, which brought such a hot potato to the Yin Marquis' mansion. But Yin Ruhua felt that there might be some turning point here, because if it was really the fate of the phoenix, why did the emperor give up so easily on his plan to let Yin Ruhua marry the crown prince? You should know that the crown prince is the most sensitive son of the emperor. Compared to the crown prince, the other princes are almost like what they have picked up. But the fate of Yin Ruhua's phoenix and phoenix simply passed away in front of the emperor, and it did not receive too much attention anymore. Mother doesn't need to know too clearly. Anyway, it's not Antony who asked the emperor to choose the crown princess to stay at the Marquis' mansion. I have already stopped her from doing that, and there is no rumor about it, said the Marquis. Dad, are you just protecting third sister like this? I'm your legitimate daughter. Yin Ruhua was able to hold on, but when she heard his obvious biased words, she burst into tears. You dare to cry. Lord Yin was also angry. If it weren't for you and your mother deliberately going to Tianlong Temple to tell their fortunes, how could they have attracted you? It's too late to say anything now. You have to marry if you don't marry. You are the fate of the phoenix and phoenix, and the emperor wants you to congratulate the crown prince. No one can replace you. The fate of the phoenix and phoenix. Mrs. Yin immediately looked at her eldest granddaughter with surprise. Are you serious about this? The fortune teller indeed said that the 8 characters of the moon are priceless. Zhang nodded quickly. Mrs. Yin made a decisive decision and said, Ruyu cannot marry. Let Ruhua marry, and just now Ruhua also agreed. Let the third daughter marry. How could that be? Lord Yin felt that his weak and unable to take care of herself, Aunt Hui, might not be able to endure tonight. Yin Ruhua spoke up at the right time and said, Grandmother, as long as you are willing to spare my aunt, I am willing to marry. Hua. Lord Yin's face changed and he quickly stopped drinking. Your aunt is fine, there's no need for you to do this. After speaking, he looked at his old mother and said, Mother, it's just a matter of her mind. Hua won't get married. You rebellious son, are you going to trap the entire Marquis' mansion and ignore it? Mrs. Yin trembled with anger. If Miss Eyre doesn't marry and Miss San doesn't marry, then there's only, said Mrs. Yin's mother. Law softly. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's gaze turned towards Yin Ruxing. Yin Ruhua was protected by an old lady, Yin Ruhua was protected by her father, but Yin Ruxing felt like a fish cut by someone on a chopping board. Yin Ruxing burst into tears and said, Dad, daughter. Daughter. She didn't have a daughter for a long time, so she came. Yin Ruhua seized the opportunity to lay the groundwork and said, Isn't it just marrying the crown prince? How fortunate is this? Sister, how about this? Aunt Li seemed to muster up the courage and said, since Miss San said so, how about giving you this blessing? Zhang also sneered, Aunt Li is right. Since Miss San has such a high level of consciousness, why not take the initiative? Yin Ruhua said in a slutty tone, this is big sister's blessing. How could I have that fate to enjoy? Unable to bear the injustice, Yin Ruxing covered her face and ran out crying. Aunt Li quickly went to chase after her. Mrs. Yin instructed her servants, go and watch Ru Xing, don't let her do anything foolish. This sentence undoubtedly confirmed the candidate for Chongxi, but old lady Yin had no choice. A legitimate granddaughter with the order of Luan Feng could never marry the sick crown prince Chongxi. And this illegitimate granddaughter whom she dislikes is protected by a rebellious and unfilial son with a long head. The matter of excitement is imminent, so it can only be settled like this. Although she is a great-granddaughter who has been filial to her since childhood, she cannot ignore the entire family of the Yin Marquis mansion, can she? I really wronged you, big sister. What a big pot to bear for the person who caused such a huge disaster. Yin Ruhua looked at Yin Ruhua with a smile on her face. Yin Ruhua was so angry that she said, Yin Ruhua, don't be so cheap and act obedient. The person you're going to marry should be you. Yin Ruhua was too lazy to pay attention to her, but in her dream, it was unbelievable that she would lose to such a person. Talking 1,000 words, it's still because I picked the wrong man. What her aunt said is indeed true. Women in this world are not easy. We must grasp the important matter of choosing a man well. This is the second reincarnation. So she must not miss the crown prince this time. Dad, big sister is really aggrieved, but we can't let her suffer such a big loss. We need to arrange a good dowry for her and let her marry into the crown prince's mansion, Yin Ruhua turned to say. The Marquis of Yin did not feel guilty about letting his eldest daughter marry, as she was the eldest daughter and there was no reason to let his younger sister go. And this matter was also caused by the Zhang family. It's just a scapegoat for the second daughter and has little to do with the third daughter. Although it may seem like going to celebrate, it is also marrying into the crown prince's mansion and enjoying endless wealth and honor throughout one's life. He said, although she was in a hurry, she wouldn't have been wronged. I don't know how much pressure box my mother plans to add to my elder sister. Yin Ruhua asked with a smile, relying on her father's favor. If the fire in Zhang's heart could turn into substance, he was afraid that Yin Ruhua would be completely burned. This time, Ruxing is getting married on behalf of Ruhua. Madam needs to give at least 2,000 taels to Ruxing for personal use. Lord Yin swept directly at her. Zhang's face changed drastically, and she finally couldn't hold on anymore. Marquis, are you not using money for money? If you speak, it will be 2,000 taels. Even if it's like the moon, I'm just preparing 2,000 taels of dowry for her. Don't fool me, when I don't know you. Yin Marquis snorted coldly, you can't lose these 2,020.1 cents. If it's missing, you can make up for it from the public, and then deduct it from Ruhua's dowry. After all, whether she married into the crown prince's mansion or not, Mrs. Yin didn't want her granddaughter's wedding to look too ugly. She said, 2,000 taels isn't much, you can add it. I will also add 500 taels like a star. After all, she came to serve her since she was young, and this time she couldn't be too humble. Zhang's face changed, but in the end, she could only grit her teeth and bleed. Out of the public, 3,000 taels will be given, and I will also add another 2,000 taels, said Lord Yin. Yin Ruhua calculated that if Yin Ruxing got married like this, it would be 7,500 taels. Her aunt also has a farm shop under her name, so she doesn't have no concept of silver. 10 taels of silver can provide enough food for several families in the farm for a year. Go to the best restaurant in the capital, Yuqiong Tower, for a meal, and a table full of good wine and dishes will be served in 3 to 5 liang. Moreover, it is extremely good for the official family's young lady to marry off with a dowry of 1 or 2,000 taels, with an excess of 3,000 taels or more. For example, when Zhang said she prepared 2,000 taels of dowry for Yin Ruhua, it was actually not a small amount. So you can imagine how much money these 7,500 taels are. I don't know how Yin Ruxing lived in the crown prince's mansion. Since she married, even if she couldn't be favored, wouldn't it be good to be happy and wealthy? With such a large sum of money, she would definitely be able to live a carefree and comfortable life. After coming out of the autumn water garden, Zhang took Yin Ruhua and left without even greeting Lord Yin. She's had enough of this ruthless man. Yin Ruhua looked at her father with a look of admiration and said, if it weren't for my father coming in time today, my daughter might have accepted this marriage. I see that you are not afraid of anything in your daily life. Why can't you hold on so much at critical moments? Your grandmother believed in such a scare. Can Dad still let her threaten your aunt's life? That's definitely not under threat. My aunt has a father to protect her, but my mother's family. The Fan family doesn't need you to worry about it either. Your maternal grandmother and others, except for your father who helped a little at the beginning, later your uncle was already self-sufficient, and your cousin also relied on his abilities to become a jinsher and become a commoner. His future is bright. How could he handle it casually? Your grandmother is always frightening you. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Dreams. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Dreams. Yin Ruhua smiled and said sweetly, Auntie treats me like a pearl when I was young. Grandmother wants to punish her, how can I just watch? She looked at her father and said, and I'm also doing it for you. Dad doesn't need you to sacrifice like this. Yin Ruhua thought to herself that this was being favored with confidence and fearlessness. As a commoner, Yin Ruxing was not as lucky as her. However, everyone was irrelevant, and she didn't feel that there was anything wrong with Yin Ruxing, because this joyful incident was not brought on by her. Moreover, Aunt Li could also compete for favor and seek benefits for her daughter, it was just that her skills were inferior to those of others. If the eldest sister doesn't want to marry, and the second sister doesn't want to marry either, I won't watch anything happen to the Marquis' mansion. Even if I don't want to, I will marry and never make my father difficult. Yin Ru said seriously. Lord Yin was moved and said, Dad knows, go back and see your aunt. She must be worried about you now. Yin Ruhua waved her hand to her father and came to visit her aunt with a curling bottle. Miss, you're really scaring me to death. I thought Miss was really going to congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince, Curling said with lingering fear. Yin Ruhua squinted and said, You're right, I really want to go and congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince. Curling paused for a moment and looked at her young lady, Miss, did you make a mistake? Yin Ruhua chuckled lightly, without further explanation, and curled the teapot as if her young lady had made a slip of the tongue. But when Yin Ruhua saw her Aunt Ani, her first sentence was, Aunt, I'm going to congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince. Aunt Ani is actually at ease. If the Marquis goes to the autumn water garden, her daughter will definitely not be married to celebrate, otherwise the Marquis will not be able to pass her test. So when she heard her daughter's words, Aunt Ani angrily said, You child, shouldn't you really be suffering from heatstroke, fever, and confusion? You've started talking nonsense. Auntie, I'm telling you the truth, I'm going to congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince and marry him. Yin Ruhua said. Aunt Huey's heart couldn't help but tremble as she looked at her, Aren't you possessed by something unclean? You talk nonsense as soon as you come in. Speaking to Zhou's mother, she said, Hurry up and burn a handful of mugwort to fumigate her and eliminate the bad luck. Zhou's mother also felt that Miss San had something unclean on her body, so without saying a word, she went to burn a fire basin with mugwort. I have a deep affection for His Highness the Crown Prince for a long time, and I will not regret my infatuation. I want to marry the Crown Prince. Before she left, she heard Miss San say something that sounded hallucinatory, and she quickened her pace. Aunt Ani also felt that her daughter had fallen for evil and was very worried. She asked the stunned curling pot, did Hua be tampered with by Madame or by Aunt Li? I don't know. The curling pot was about to cry, Miss, don't scare the maidservant. Do you remember picking up the maidservant by the side of Daming Lake? Yin Ruhua. The mugwort pot held by Zhou's mother was smoked from beginning to end, but it was not enough. Antony also wanted to ask someone to spend a lot of money to hire a highly skilled Taoist priest to practice exorcism. But when stopped by Yin Ruhua, she said to the people like curling the kettle, everyone step back, I want to talk to my aunt. Antony looked at her daughter and wanted to hear what the dead maid was going to say. She waved her hand and let the maids all go down. As soon as the maids left, Yin Ruhua smiled and said, does Auntie think her daughter is crazy and possessed of evil, that's why she said such things? Antonice looked at her daughter. The mother and daughter looked very similar, but Yin Ruhua had a different kind of purity and innocence compared to Antonice's charming appearance. She combines purity and charm together. Simply put, she will be pure if she is pure, and she can be charming if she is charming. If it weren't for being possessed by evil, would this be what you said? Aunt Hui was naturally satisfied with her daughter, but she rolled her eyes wide. Yin Ruhua took it seriously and said, Auntie, I'm telling you the truth. I must get married and celebrate. The position of crown princess belongs to me, and no one wants to snatch it. Aunt Hui was stunned, really stunned. But she also reacted quickly and shouted at the door, Mom Zhou, boil another pot of mugwort and boil another pot of mugwort water. Auntie. Yin Ruhua pulled her, don't be suspicious anymore. I'm fine, nothing happened. I told Auntie, but she can't even tell her father about this. Antony looked at her up and down before saying, aren't you clear about Aunt's mouth? Speak up. She also wants to know what's wrong with her daughter, who can say such nonsense. Yin Ruhua naturally believed in her aunt. The best thing for her in the world was her aunt, who gave her almost everything she could. So she slowly talked about the things in her dream. Antony suddenly thought her daughter's dream was absurd upon hearing it, but gradually she stopped. Even when Zhou's mother outside wanted to bring water in, she stopped her. At the end of the dream, the daughter watched helplessly as she turned into a pile of white bones, with groups of crows stopping on the bones and occasionally pecking twice. The wolf howled far away, along with the cold wind, as if lamenting her daughter's tragic life. Yin Ruhua remained silent. Aunt Huey's heart couldn't stop trembling, this is just a dream. This is definitely not a dream. Yin Ruhua shook her head and looked at her aunt seriously. Before the imperial decree was issued, the crown prince was critically ill and the emperor wanted the young lady of the Yin Marquis mansion to go and celebrate. I had already learned from my dream that if someone was chosen as Yin Ruxing, she would end up depressed 1 year after marrying into the crown prince's mansion. What about you? Did you get married at that time? Aunt Hui suppressed her palpitations and said. At that time, I was in the backyard of the fourth prince. Yin Ruhua's eyes were filled with nostalgia, and in her dream, she only roughly walked through her life, many details were vague and not very real. How could it be the fourth prince? Shouldn't it be the third prince? Antony couldn't help but say. This time, she was spying on the whereabouts of the third prince, which is why she was ambushed by Madame. I don't like the third prince. Mom, the person I liked before has always been the fourth prince, Yin Ruhua said calmly. Antony didn't even know about this yet, so she couldn't help but pinch her and said, you dead girl, the fourth prince, besides his good skin and average patience, there's nothing worth liking. The third prince doesn't have anything that I like either. It seems like he is well versed in both literature and martial arts, but in reality, it's all a staff member behind him who provides advice and advice. After the staff member was removed, he only managed to survive a few rounds of attacks before being defeated. Aunt Hui choked and said, do you think the crown prince is the real dragon? Can you be sure? He's almost dying of illness. Every time it's critically ill, but in the end, I just hang out and survive. Besides, if I'm not sure, can I still rush to celebrate? Is your daughter that kind of silly? Yin Ruhua is looking for a powerful and influential husband. Love without material possessions is like scattered sand, it doesn't even need to be blown away by the wind. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Shuangshuang Major Illness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 7. True Love in Adversity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. True Love in Adversity. Zhang snorted coldly and said, "It's precisely because my wife has trusted you for so many years that I didn't guard against you. When it comes to the situation, have you stabbed my wife like this? Li, my wife really looks down on you. But do you think this way she won't have to marry anymore? My wife told you not to dream. Marquis has already sent someone to secretly hire the best doctor. After a few doses of strong medicine, she will have to marry if she doesn't." Aunt Li nodded repeatedly, "Okay, just let her marry over. She's just a commoner, this is her fate." Zhang looked at her unremarkable appearance and although he despised it, he was also slightly satisfied. "It seems that this matter has nothing to do with you. It's because the young lady herself doesn't want to get married. You should go back and persuade her well. She should be content with her character. This time, the Yin Marquis mansion has prepared so many dowries for her, and even those first-class noble families in the capital are marrying their legitimate young ladies. It's estimated that this kind of dowry will be at the bottom of the box." Yes, what Madame said is that the maid and concubine told this dead girl the same thing when she came back yesterday. Actually, it's not that my wife insisted on her getting married. I'm also willing to help her. Yesterday at the old lady's place, my wife put in a lot of effort. The illegitimate daughter couldn't stop the old lady from nodding, but the Marquis killed her. Finally, this marriage had to fall on Ruxing, Zhang said, looking at her. Aunt Li said repeatedly, "I know, madam, there's no need to explain more. When I go back, I'll let Ruxing drink medicine well. I must let her marry me." Zhang was satisfied and said, "All right, let's step down." After Aunt Li went down, Zhang came in to see her daughter. Yin Ruhua, who was feverish and weak, said, "Mother, do you think Aunt Li is pretending to be gentle or really gentle?" "She has always been this mouse coward," Zhang said. "Otherwise, she wouldn't have picked on Aunt Li to give her a face and let her serve her. She knew she would hold on to her for the rest of her life as a pawn. I have already had someone interrogate me, and indeed it was Yin Ruxing's little hoof who took the initiative and secretly asked someone to buy ice." Zhang sneered. Yin Ruhua sneered, "She really wants to struggle. She's not a fool either. She's not willing to go and congratulate the crown prince. It's just the crown prince's body and bones. If this doesn't work out, maybe she'll have to accompany." Finally, the word burial didn't come out. Yin Ruhua understood and her face turned pale. She was convinced by her mother and said, "Mother, you really have a clever plan. Her illness has cut off the possibility of going on to have fun." The news that came from the mansion all came as expected by Yin Ruhua. Aunt Hui called her over and exclaimed excitedly, "Hua, you're absolutely right. They really used this trick. Your father is angry and has secretly sent someone to hire an old doctor to prescribe a powerful medicine for Yin Ruxing and ask her to marry." Yin Ruhua calmly took a sip of tea and said, "So, Auntie, have you completely believed your daughter's words?" "You girl, Auntie doesn't doubt it." "No, it's not true." Originally, Aunt Hui had some concerns in her heart, but when she saw her daughter so well prepared, she no longer doubted her daughter's dream. If the crown prince is okay and eventually ascends to the throne as a true dragon, then of course his daughter will marry. If she gets married, she will become the crown princess. Although this matter may sound unbelievable, Antony thinks it may be her daughter's chance. If we can seize this opportunity in front of us, with our daughter's abilities, she will definitely be able to rise up with the wind. "Hua, what should we do now? Aunt Hui said. How to do it? Yin Ruhua put down the teacup and said, Auntie, you need to cooperate with me and work hard. Next, the Yin Marquis' mansion will be affected by a disaster. Her father's request for a doctor to be secretly sent down was discovered by the political enemy. How could the political enemy miss such an opportunity to slander the Yin Marquis' mansion? He exposed several young ladies of the Yin Marquis' mansion who fell ill one after another, making it clear that they despised His Highness the Crown Prince. Although the Crown Prince has always been critically ill, he is the legitimate son of the Emperor. Has the most favored legitimate son been despised by a small marquis? The Emperor is directly enraged. The entire Yin Marquis' mansion was plunged into a state of deep water and fire. It was still Marquis Yin who went outside the palace gate to kneel sincerely, indicating that it was a political enemy slander. The young lady of the Marquis' mansion was already preparing to get married, and because the excitement was imminent, it could not be delayed. Only then did the Emperor suppress his anger. The Yin Marquis' mansion only managed to escape one calamity. So Yin Ruhua didn't need to do anything, nor could she do anything, because the political enemies had already started spreading the matter of the Yin Marquis' mansion outside. Sure enough, in less than an hour, it spread outside. Lord Yin was originally sitting with Antony when he heard the butler rushing over to report on this matter. He jumped up from his seat and exclaimed in shock and anger, "These bastards! Marquis, what should we do? If this matter were to spread to the Emperor's ears, it would be unimaginable." Aunt Hui immediately began her performance, her face turning pale. Being threatened by her, Lord Yin's face was no better than hers, and he trembled a bit. He is too aware that if this matter were to be heard by the Emperor, the Yin Marquis' mansion would definitely be unable to bear it. Antony continued, "Mista is sick, and Miss Eyre is also sick. If the Emperor sends someone to investigate and find out that they are all trying to avoid the Crown Prince's pleasure, then if the Emperor gets angry, our Marquis' mansion may suffer a lot. These unfilial daughters." Lord Yin was both anxious and angry. "You should rest for now, I'll go handle the matter first." She was about to leave, but was grabbed by Aunt Hui. "If there's anything else, wait for me to come back. I'm very busy now, and I need to go see the Emperor immediately to explain this matter," said Lord Yin patiently, although anxious. Antony wiped her tears and said, "What should Marquis say when he sees the Emperor? Miss and Miss are both seriously ill, and it's hard to hide anything from sending a eunuch down." Lord Yin was also very anxious. "Miss Eyre, I'm afraid you won't be able to count on it, so Lord Ho, you can only let that girl from Hua Eyre go to celebrate." As Antony spoke, she fell softly to the ground, crying in despair and sorrow. Lord Yin never thought his aunt would say such a thing. For a moment everyone was stunned. He is not unaware that his third daughter is pretending to be sick, but this daughter is his favorite. Since childhood, she has been a source of pain and was also born to Antony, the most beloved woman. How could Lord Yin be willing to let her bring joy to the sick Crown Prince? If the Crown Prince can be groomed well, that's okay. If he can't be groomed well, being a widow would be a good end. Perhaps he would have to go to the funeral, like a flower and jade, and holding his daughter who grew up from a young age. How can he be willing to bear it? The situation hasn't reached that point yet. Lord Yin was very moved and hugged his weak and helpless concubine, saying, "Before, he used to think that these women were just being obedient and coaxing him, but now it's really a case of adversity seeing the truth." At this critical moment, even if she couldn't bear any more grief, she was willing to let Hua stand up and take on this great calamity for the Marquis' mansion. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The way is still a bit shallow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Tips for evergreen trees in the backyard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 10. Crown Prince's Concubine. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 10 Crown Prince's Concubine. Actually, Auntie's approach may not necessarily be suitable for you. Some men like someone like Auntie, such as your father. But some men still prefer those who are gentle and elegant, dignified and virtuous, as well as those who like small and elegant jade, ancient and mysterious, and those who are naturally charming. Different men have different types of preferences. As for what the Crown Prince likes, it's up to you to explore on your own. But don't rush forward, you must have patience. No excellent hunter lacks patience, so be careful. Remember that being impatient is a taboo. Yin Ruhua leaned against her aunt's arms, listening to these words, and also asked herself what she had been wondering, Auntie, why do women have to please men? They are all people, why do we have to be selected by them like goods? Antony sighed and said, this is how the world is. In the eyes of the world, women are white candles, and men are nails. 1,000 good white candles are not worth a rotten nail. How many capable ladies from wealthy families have been promised to sons of scoundrels with family backgrounds but no abilities outside? Being honed for a lifetime has delayed a lifetime. But what's the solution? The world is like this, women are not easy. I don't really feel it, Yin Ruhua snorted. She is a woman, how could she be willing to belittle herself? Men can still participate in the imperial examination and leap over the gate, but as women, there is no room for us to stand out in this world. In this life, we cannot rely on ourselves. Even a royal princess, such as the eldest princess, has to marry a man she has never met before and doesn't know his temperament. Antony recounted the cruel reality, the golden branches and jade leaves of the royal family are still like this, let alone ordinary women like us. Remember not to be too bold in anything. Anyway, being alive is the most important thing. To live well, there is nothing more important than being alive. Only by living can everything be possible. Did you remember Aunt's words? Antony's face was full of love and concern, pulling her daughter's sideburns behind her ear. I remember. Yin Ruhua leaned greedily against her aunt's embrace. In fact, her aunt had also taught in her dreams, but Yin Ruhua still wanted to hear her aunt say that after this marriage, how long will she be able to come back and see her aunt again? The opportunity to listen to her aunt is rare. Luofeng Garden. The medicine is ready, and Zhang is feeding Yin Ruhua medicine. The old lady is reporting on Yin Ruhua's conversation with Mrs. Yin in the autumn water garden. Listening to Yin Ruhua's loyal remarks in front of her, Yin Ruhua still looked mocking and contemptuous. Who should I tell such nonsense to? They all grew up in the same family, who and what can't be clear. Everyone would sacrifice themselves for others, but don't expect Yin Ruhua. If there's really anything, she will designate to hide faster than rabbits. But when Yin Ruhua heard that she was begging for the position of concubine for her aunt, Yin Ruhua didn't even want to drink this medicine. The position of concubine. She had a beautiful idea. Originally, her birth mother was just a lowly concubine, and being promoted to a good concubine was considered her good fortune. Now she dares to think about Xiao wanting the position of concubine. Zhang fed her daughter the last bite and asked her mother. Law, does she have any other requirements? I just want to elevate her aunt to a noble concubine, nothing else. Mother, she's just taking advantage of every inch. She's just a lowly commoner, and asking her to congratulate the crown prince is a blessing she has cultivated for several lifetimes. If you dare to make demands, you absolutely cannot agree to her. Yin Ruhua immediately said. Zhang handed the medicine bowl to her mother. Law and said, why didn't you agree to her? Besides, the old lady has already agreed to this position of noble concubine, and I can't argue with her face. Grandmother, is this an old fool? How could such things be handled casually? Yin Ruhua couldn't help but complain. Zhang looked at her daughter like this and said, we need to have a long-term perspective. We shouldn't just focus on the current situation. Compared to letting Yin Ruhua pass by and be happy, mentioning Aunt E as a noble concubine is not worth mentioning. I'm not afraid that she will raise the condition, but I'm afraid that she won't, because raising the condition means she will marry, and then the crisis in front of the Yin Marquis mansion is lifted. If there were any major problems with the Yin Marquis mansion, who would suffer a big loss? Her two legitimate sons who have already grown up, as well as this legitimate daughter, brother, and sister, suffer the most. The person she wants to marry is the crown prince. Although she will be recorded under my name as the legitimate daughter of the Yin Marquis mansion, if her birth mother is only an aunt in the mansion, it will somewhat insult the crown prince's identity. Even if she doesn't mention it, your father will definitely elevate Aunt Annie to a noble concubine. Instead of doing so, it's better to sell her a favor and let her marry in a down-to-earth manner. This way, the crisis in the Yin Marquis mansion will be resolved, and you don't have to worry anymore. Zhang said this, knowing that Lord Yin had long wanted to elevate Aunt Hui's position, but she had never had the chance. Upon hearing these words, Yin Ruhua's face improved significantly. It's still cheaper for her. She's such a lowly person, but if the crown prince can't handle it well, then she smiled inwardly. Don't think about this anymore, let's bless her and make the crown prince good. Otherwise, the emperor may not easily give up. He was originally interested in your phoenix's destiny. Yin Ruhua's face turned pale. You still have a long way to go. You must learn to see far away, and being short-sighted is a big taboo. Zhang took the opportunity to educate. Is it my daughter's? My daughter is worried about raising Aunt Annie's heart. She and my father were childhood sweethearts who had arranged for a baby marriage, Yin Ruhua quickly said. Zhang sneered and said, so what? Now her family is no longer the same as before. A concubine without a son and a powerful mother's family. No matter how difficult her heart is, can she still threaten me? This is why Aunt Annie was favored, but Zhang never resorted to tearing his face at Lord Yin. Aunt Hui doesn't have a son. Without a son, there is no possibility of inheriting the Marquis' mansion, and it will not be an obstacle for her two promising sons. As for Lord Yin's love, she knew before she got married that he had been engaged to Aunt Hui. She was also engaged to a marriage back then, but was expelled by her fiancé. She discovered that the bastard had a relationship with her cousin, and the villain reported it first. Although both parties suffered losses in the end, as a woman, her reputation naturally suffered greatly, and she happened to catch up with the incident of the Fan family, so the two families hit it off immediately. In fact, at the beginning, she also hoped that the couple would act together. After all, Lord Yin was very handsome and charming. Later on, it was discovered that Lord Yin had been secretly taking care of the Fan family and trying to clear their suspicion. In the end, he also succeeded and brought Aunt Hui home. Since then, she knew that she couldn't compare to childhood sweethearts, so she didn't expect the feelings of Lord Yin. If Aunt Annie wanted it, she would give it to her. Yin Ruhua suddenly admired and said, if my mother were not a woman, she would have such a broad mind to strategize in the military camp. You girl, Zhang scolded her. Yin Ruhua said again, I didn't expect Yin Ruxing to look honest and actually ask her to throw out this hot potato. This despicable hoof almost implicated our Marquis' mansion. She wants to die as she please, don't bring us along. As soon as Yin Ruxing was mentioned, Zhang couldn't help but curse. End of this chapter.